And this is a Fox News alert. Just a moment from now, Dana Perino goes one-on-one with Sheryl Sandberg as Facebook's COO leans in to get out the word on just what the company is doing to better protect your privacy. Plus, White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders, as you can see, set to hold a briefing shortly as the Trump administration announces new sanctions against Russia today. Hello, everyone. I'm Ed Henry, and this is the Daily Briefing. Facebook revealing this week that the data of as many of 87 million users was improperly accessed by political consulting firm Cambridge Analytica. Today, Facebook is announcing new steps to help make sure ads and pages on the site are authentic and transparent. They're now pre-screening advertisers to make sure the issue ads you see are actually authentic. I'll be back in a few moments for some analysis, but for now, let's go straight to my friend Dana Perino, live at Facebook's headquarters in Menlo Park, California, with a very special guest, Sheryl Sandberg. Good to see you, Dana.
Thanks, Ed, and thanks for filling in today. We appreciate it. And Sheryl, thanks for having us at headquarters. You've been breaking news. In fact, there's new breaking news about how Facebook is trying to sort of get ahead of some of these things. But the data privacy issue is certainly front and center. It seems like every day consumers, not just at Facebook, but consumers find out that their data is being sold here, left, right, and center. And at one point you had said something about it's an arms race. And I wonder if the consumers are in an arms race to protect their privacy, is it one that they could ever win?
Well, let's start with what's happening here, because what you're talking about is a broader industry issue, and it's a very important one. We know that at Facebook we did not do enough to protect people's data. I'm really sorry for that. Mark is really sorry for that. And now we're taking very strong action to get ahead of the problems. We announced that starting Monday, we're going to start rolling out all around the world, right at the top of your newsfeed, a very easy link which shows you all the apps you've connected to and shared your data with, and a very easy way to delete them. We're being much more restrictive on what apps, what data apps can use, and particularly on other surfaces too, not just the old apps from before, but groups and pages and events. This is a long process. We are going through and systematically looking. We expect to find more, just like we did this week, and then we're going to proactively come out. We're going to fix the problems, tell people about them. We know that we need to make a different level of investment here, and one we should have done sooner, but we're doing in a very big way now. We had about 10,000 people working in safety and security at the beginning of the year. By the end of this year, we'll more than double to 20,000. We're investing in smart technology. And our goal is to make sure everyone can share safely on Facebook.
Well, data is certainly more valuable commodity now than anything in the world. And you've talked a lot about responsibility and transparency. Would Facebook be willing to talk about how much each person is worth when it comes to the ads? I mean, so that they have some sense of what they're worth.
Well, let's talk about ads, because it's a really important thing here. And you mentioned selling data. So let's be clear. We do not sell people's data. We don't do it for ads. We don't do it for any other reason. We also don't give your data to any advertisers. We have an advertising-based business model, and I think that's really important. Just like TV, just like radio, people can use this for free all around the world. And if you're trying to connect 2 billion people, using it for free is really important access to the content. We have privacy built into our ads model. So the way it works is that someone wants to show an ad on Facebook. We can show it to the people who might be interested in it, and then we do not pass individual information back to that advertiser. And it's really important that people understand that.
Okay, so but when you talked about the 20,000 people that would then be helping look at ads and things and trying to protect people, but if you have 2 billion users, is Facebook getting just too big? I mean, it's part of the success of the business. It's gotten so big. You have 2 billion users. Can you hire enough people to actually keep up with that?
At our size and scope, we have real responsibility. And we know that people have that question, and it's a question we're answering. We are ramping as quickly as possible, and you have to use technology too. What you said about an arms race at the beginning is true. Security is an arms race. That doesn't mean we don't have responsibility for it. We do. Right. But we all know that we're going to build something. Someone's going to try to get around it. We're going to build something. Someone's going to try to get around it. So we have to learn from the past and adjust. So the thing we're announcing today is about election ads. We learned from what happened in 2016. And what we're announcing today is that if you are running not just an election ad, so you're a candidate, but you're running an issue ad, and we're going to publish a list of issues, we're going to verify who you are. You're going to have to tell us your location, your identity. If you won't tell us that or we don't think it's correct, we're not going to let you run. We're going to label all of those ads as political ads, and then there's going to be an archive anyone can look at which shows who paid for the ad, how much was spent, and the demographics.
Does that really come from what we know now about Russian influence in the election? And how far back does it go? Did Facebook know in the fall of 2015 that it had a problem with Russians trying to influence the election?
We learned about this late. We did not know then. We had seen some early activity. We had published some stuff, but we didn't understand the gist of it. But now we do. And now we're taking action. You saw this week, we took down an additional 270 pages from the Russian-backed IRA. Now, a lot of people said, well, those are in Russian, targeted at Russians, in Russian, in language Russian targeted. And our answer was, these are Russian trolls. This is deceptive content. It has no place on our platform in the United States, in Russia, anywhere in the world. And we're not stopping there. We're looking for other things like it. And we're having some success based on what we learned in the 2016 election. Before the election in France, we found 30,000 fake accounts and took them down. Before the special Alabama Senate election, we found some Macedonian spammers that looked to be economically motivated, and we took those down in advance as well.
The 2016 election seems it continues to be relitigated over and over again, and I appreciate that you're saying that. So going forward, this could happen. But is there any way, given the scope and scale of the election and all the things that happened, is there ever going to be an actual way to prove that any of that meddling had an impact on the election, changed minds, changed votes? To me, that seems almost impossible.
There are really important questions being asked about that election. We've shared all of the stuff that was published publicly. We let people know if they liked it or if they saw it. And certainly those questions need to be answered. We're very focused, as you said, and we should be on going forward in the next election. So one of the most important things we're focused on is fake accounts. Fake accounts were the source of the problem. And people think of fake accounts as often politically motivated, and they are, but a lot of times they're financially motivated.
Right.
People write outlandish headlines, get you to click, make money. So we've gone after those economic incentives. They can't participate in monetization on Facebook, just as one example.
So we've talked about three different big issues, fake news, privacy, data, how big Facebook is. Next week, Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO, who has been just a very naturally idealistic person. He really believes in the good that can come from connecting this global community. And next week, he's going to face members of Congress from both sides of the aisle that are quite cynical and realistic. How do you think that will go?
Mark's happy to go to Congress because Mark wants to answer every question people have about the service we offer. You know, we really believe in social experiences. And I think what happened here is we were very focused on creating that. Good things happen when you can share your information, right? You can find your friends' birthdays, you can share events with them. And we were really focused on that. And we weren't focused enough on being proactive enough. And Mark is happy to say, here's what we weren't doing and here's what we're doing now. Mark and I are also very focused on the good that happens on Facebook and making sure we protect it.
I don't think anybody questions that there's a lot of good that happens, but I think that especially if you were a commentator during the 2016 election, I mean, the negativity, the push, especially from the Russian bots and trolls and those Macedonian troll farms, the things that people have complained about, it was difficult to manage your own understanding of what was going on. It seems to me that the idealism is certainly, I'm somebody who wakes up on the sunny side of the street. But I do think that the cynicism is real when it comes to how human nature has worked. And we are actually more tribal than before. In fact, if you look at the Gallup numbers of polarization, just even since Facebook started, I'm not blaming Facebook, but the more connected we are through technology, the more tribal we've become. And I think that that's one of the things that people are looking at, is that there's actually evil that can be done too.
And we did not pay enough attention to that. And now we are getting ahead of the problem. We're working really hard on false news. People want accurate information on Facebook, and we want them to have accurate information. So what we're doing is we're working with third-party fact checkers, everyone from the AP to the Weekly Standard. We have people in all 50 states now ahead of the election. If something is marked false, we warn people who are about to share it. We go back and warn the people who did share it. We dramatically decrease its distribution, and we mark related articles so we can give the other side of the story.
And speaking of that, so 2 years ago I got to come here, and there were concerns by a lot of conservatives that their content was being suppressed and that liberal content was being basically pushed forward. And then conservatives felt like things got better for a while. Then recently, when the algorithm changed, there's a lot of, not just conservative, but some liberal, sort of smaller news sites that say they built their businesses based on what Facebook had suggested would be the best way to handle things, and they had really good traffic. When the news feed changed and Facebook made those changes, they've seen dramatic drop-offs in their content, and they understand that there's a desire by Facebook to try to have better content. And would there be a willingness, and I think you'll be asked this next week, for Facebook to be more transparent about that algorithm so that they can feel that they are working on a level playing field?
We're definitely increasing transparency across the board. These newsfeed changes are important. I'd like to talk through what they were. We announced 2 big changes this year. The first, which was the biggest, it affected the most of the newsfeed, is about meaningful social interaction. So we care a lot that people have a good psychological experience on Facebook. And it turns out that research shows that when I'm interacting with a friend, so I like someone's photo or they do something, a comment on mine, even if it's small, that's a very good for me psychologically and the other person psychologically because we feel more connected. But when I'm passive viewing content, news, other things, and not doing anything, that's not as positive. So the biggest change we made in newsfeed was to dial up the friends and family interactions and dial down passive content, including news across the board, bipartisan, affects everyone. There's a second change we made, which was within news to show more trusted news sources. And that change really meant that the spammy, the clicky, the more outrageous stuff got dialed down, and the stuff that people trusted, both conservative and liberal, got dialed up.
So if Congress were to recommend an algorithm review board where people could feel like everybody from all political stripes is on a more level playing field, that might be something Facebook's willing to talk about?
We know there are big questions about how we run and how we should be regulated, and we're open to any conversations people want to have. These are important questions, and we want to give answers.
One of the things that they'll probably also ask you is making those decisions about the news feed. Did that put Facebook into a position of being more of a publisher and a media company rather than just the pipes that were providing the information?
Our goal is always to be a platform for all ideas. We are running a service that 2 billion people use, right? We work in a bipartisan way with people on both sides of the aisle. We do things, in a way that is not biased. And we work on issues in a bipartisan way with Republicans and Democrats. I was in Houston earlier this week, and one of the things we're working with, I know your viewers care about, are jobs, right? People are worried about jobs. So great majority of job creation in this country comes from small businesses. So I was in Houston this week with the mayor, meeting with small businesses. There are 10 million small businesses in the U.S. that use Facebook. 42% of them tell us that they're hiring because of the distribution they can
Which
get.
brings me to a last question for you. So the New York Times this past week on Monday ran an article saying that Silicon Valley is warming to President Trump. And they pointed to tax cuts and regulations and the focus on jobs as the reason that there might be some better feelings about President Trump and Silicon Valley and possible cooperation going forward. Do you see it that way too?
I can't speak for all of Silicon Valley. They're a big place with, lots of different interests.
All right. Sheryl Sandberg, thanks for joining us. You have a great company here, and you have a big testimony next week from Mark Zuckerberg. We appreciate your time.
Thank you for coming out. I really appreciate it.
I was honored to be asked. Thank you. All right, Ed Henry, I will send it back to you for the rest of the show.
Dana, great job as always. A lot to unpack there, so I want to bring in our panel right away. Wall Street Journal senior video reporter Shelby Holliday and Fox Business reporter Deirdre Bolton. Great to have you both here. I'm going to throw a jump ball here. A lot to digest, but one thing that struck me was at the very top, Sheryl Sandberg said on Monday there will be a quote-unquote very easy link at the top of your Facebook page to delete apps, get a better handle on your privacy. And the first thing I thought was, that's a great idea. What took so long?
What took so long indeed? Well, you needed the 2 strikes at the plate, which we've already seen. So Cambridge Analytica was the second strike, and then the first strike was this run-up to our presidential election in which 125 million Americans, so half of our voting population, actually more than that, saw an ad that was either created or manipulated by Russian bots. So it took Facebook 2 strikes to get there. I'm glad they're getting there. And I think it is certainly necessary. I mean, Steve Jobs said 8 years ago, of course, completely different business model, but Ask your users, ask them at every single interface, ask them at every single corner if they want to share. Ask them until they're sick of answering you yes. So I think finally Facebook is moving in that direction.
Yeah.
But I also think there's still a distinction. I think they're just telling us more about how they're using our data. They're not necessarily changing too much. They're just being more open about their process.
Right.
So it's a step in the right
So
direction.
on that, follow up on that, if you will, Shelby, but also it's something else that struck me was Sheryl Sandberg saying, quote unquote, we don't sell data. What do they do? I thought that they did sell our data.
Right. That might be a little bit misleading, because what Facebook makes money on is the fact that they can go to advertisers and say, hey, we know all about the users on our platform, all 2 billion of them, and we can reach them in all these various ways. So they do monetize our data. They absolutely make money off of it. What happened in the past was that Facebook did allow app developers to create Facebook apps that would mine your data. They could get it. This is the big Cambridge Analytica outroar. They changed those policies in 2015, but they faced this ugly truth that all of the data that was essentially downloaded back then is out there. We're never going to get it back. We've totally lost control. I was really glad Dana asked about election meddling too, because to your point about them creating this transparent feature on your news feed on Monday, that will not notify people if they liked or followed Russian bots, Russian pages,
In the
and I
2016
think that they
election.
have still yet to be. They are not transparent about that at all. She did make a comment that they've turned over a lot of ads and information, but publicly, we only know about 18 of the 470 accounts that were set up by the Russian bot agency that Congress released. And I've spoken to a lot of Americans who messaged these Russian trolls, who handed over
What do they say?
personal information. They have no idea. They had no idea they were communicating with a Russian
the
troll.
public doesn't.
Right, and so a year and a half later,
Yeah.
Americans are still sort of in the dark.
So, Deirdre, you covered these issues closely. What was your sense overall? Is this a heartfelt opportunity, effort to bring more transparency to the process, or is this Facebook's got its stock down, it's got its back to the wall? Mark Zuckerberg's going for 2 days, not one, 2 days of testimony on Capitol Hill next week, and so this is a PR crisis.
So it is a PR crisis. I think what they're doing is a step in the right direction, but even Sheryl Sandberg and Mark Zuckerberg have both alluded to the fact that all their problems are not going to be fixed overnight. So from the point of view of a shareholder, you have to think about that. Do you want to buy this stock right now? Do you want to hold on to this stock if it has 18 months of very rough sailing ahead? So that's one point. The other point is, from a business perspective, again, the whole purpose of this machine, which I admit is now honestly not in their control. Let's just say that they built a machine that they are unable to control at this juncture. The whole point is to connect. It's to connect us. It's to connect with developers. It's to connect with ads. So if you start changing that model too much, does it exist in 2 years?
Good question, and I'm sure Mark Zuckerberg will get it. Deirdre, Shelby, thanks for joining us. Sarah Sanders has just started her briefing at the White House. She was asked about Russia, those sanctions. She said they want to have a good relationship with Russia. Let's go live to the briefing.
Last night, come out with a statement that he's threatening he's threatening tariffs on another $100 billion in Chinese goods. Since none of these tariffs have taken effect, what was the purpose of upping the ante, if you will?
The United States is responding to Chinese actions that have gone on for decades. The Chinese have engaged in unfair and illegal trade practices for many years, and this is simply a response to that. We would like to see them change and make significant changes to the trade back and forth that we have with them, and that's the purpose.
But what was it that prompted the escalation? He had already announced $60 billion worth of goods targeted for tariffs, and then he upped it to another $100 billion on top of that last night.
The president is going to actually do something and be tough when no one else has been willing to do this. Look, China created this problem, and the president is trying to put pressure on them to fix it and to take back some of the terrible actions that they've had over the last several decades.
Second question, a few minutes ago on CNBC, Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, said, well, it's not intended to. This could ignite a trade war. How concerned is the president that this could tip the balance into a trade war? Because the stock market took a look at that statement, didn't like it at all.
We are, again, this is something that China has created, and President Trump is trying to fix it. And we are moving forward in that process of we're going to continue putting pressure on China to stop in the illegal and unfair trade practices that they've continued in for decades.
Is he willing to fight a trade war on this?
We don't want it to come to that. The president wants us to move to a process of fairness, to free and fair and open trade, and that's what he's trying to do.
Does the president think that trade wars are easy to win? Is that still his view?
I think the president feels like if he is in charge of those negotiations, absolutely. He's the best negotiator at the table, and we certainly have full confidence in his ability to help move things forward. I think if you look simply at the Chorus deal, in which the president was able to get a much better deal for the United States, we made great progress on NAFTA, and we're hoping to have great progress on the trade negotiations with China.
And Sarah, if I can ask you to clarify something he said in his remarks in West Virginia. The president said yesterday it came out where this journey coming up, women are raped at levels that nobody has ever seen before. What was he talking about?
It's not.
It came out yesterday that these women
There
were
was a
being
story, I
raped.
believe it was the LA Times, I don't have it here in front of me, that documented some of that, but there's also, this is a well-documented fact that a lot of the people, I believe up to 80% in recent years of women that are making that journey have been raped in that process. The president's saying that's simply unacceptable, and this is something that should be looked at.
80% of the women coming across the border are raped?
No, he's saying that the drug smugglers, the traffickers, the coyotes, this is something that, again, has been in recent years. I know it's been up to as high as 80%.
Sarah, the Dow is down about 500 points the last time I looked. Does that give the president any pause as he pursues these actions?
We know that there could be some fluctuation, but at the same time, the president has said enough is enough. China has to change this illegal and unfair practice that they've been in, and the president is the first time. Frankly, we shouldn't be in this situation. Previous administration should have stepped up and tried to stop these actions long before today, but thankfully we have a president that's willing to actually stand up, be tough, and take some really courageous and bold action like President Trump has done.
Sarah, the next step, what is the next step? What do you want to see happen now? Do you want the Chinese to come forward and ask for talks and negotiate, or what do you want to see happen?
We certainly want to be able to negotiate. We want them to stop participating in unfair and illegal trade practices, intellectual property theft being a huge detriment to United States companies and businesses. John?
Thanks a lot, Sarah. Just following up on Steve's question regarding the stock market, the Dow is down nearly 4,000 points since January the 26th. Does the president, does the administration believe that any of that decline is attributable to any of the president's actions concerning the tariffs that the president has announced on steel and aluminum, perhaps the tariffs the president intends to impose upon China, anything related to what the administration has done since that time period?
We're focused on the long-term economic principles. Let's be clear, the tariffs that we're talking about with China have not been implemented and are months away. The president has cleared the way for a strong economic environment through the tax cuts, through deregulation. We're going to continue pushing forward on long-term economic principles, but at the same time, we're not going to allow a country like China to continue to have these unfair and illegal trade practices.
I understand that, but just to getting back to my question, any actions that the president has taken since January the 26th, since that period in which the Dow has declined almost 4,000 points, anything that he's done or said do you think is attributable to that stock market decline?
The actions of the president have certainly strengthened our economy. We've created almost 3 million new jobs. We've gotten regulation out of the way. We've provided tax cuts for American individuals and companies. Again, we're focused on the long-term economic principles, and we feel very confident in where we are.
Thanks, Sarah. On the sanctions, why hasn't the president spoken out personally about the sanctions and the behavior enumerated by the administration today by
The president
Russia?
has. It's ridiculous that you guys say that. Just earlier this week, the president stood on a stage in an open press room and talked about how he had been tough on Russia, and he's continued to do that.
Your administration has outlined. He himself has not spoken out against those. He's just said he's been tough on Russia.
No, we speak on behalf of the president day in, day out. Again, the president has signed off and directed these actions. I think that speaks volumes, actually, on how the president feels and exactly underscores what he said earlier this week when he said no one has been tougher on Russia. Katie?
Yeah, just a question about the president's stance on Scott Pruitt, keeping as close as the EPA. Has he been advised, by anyone close to him that Pruitt should step down? Where does the president stand?
This is no one other than the president has the authority to hire and fire members of his cabinet. It's a decision that he'll make. And right now I don't have any personnel announcements. The president feels that the administrator has done a good job at EPA. He's restored it back to its original purpose of protecting the environment. It's gotten unnecessary regulations out of the way. And we're continuing to review any of the concerns that we have, and I'll keep you posted if there's anything further on that front. Sorry guys, I can't hear if you're all talking at one time. Hey guys, let's be respectful. I'll call on you one at a time. Go ahead, Katie.
If everything that has been reported about Mr. Pruitt ends up being true in the president's estimation, security detail, the $50 a day law
I'm not going to
enforcement,
walk
is that
through
going to be enough?
hypotheticals until we have time to go through a full review. That's what we're doing right now. But again, the president thinks that he's done a good job on the purpose of carrying out the goals of the EPA. Justin?
Sarah, two quick ones. The first is the Treasury Secretary was on CNBC earlier. Was asked about the sort of ongoing feud with Amazon and responded by saying that the president was focused on the post office and, quote, in discussions with the post office and looking at that. The party line around here has been kind of that there are no additional actions being contemplated by the administration against Amazon. So I'm wondering if that's changed, and specifically if the White House, the president or any part of the administration has been in contact with the Postal Service about Amazon's contract.
I'm not aware of anything specific taking place on Amazon, but we are looking at ways to help the post office modernize and certainly help move them forward. The post office has lost tens of billions of dollars over the last 10 years, and we'd like to see that stop. And we're looking at the best ways to do that. But anything specific dealing with Amazon, I'm not aware of anything on the table for that.
So on this China discussion that we've been having, I think we're all trying to get a little clarity on whether the U.S. and China are actively in negotiations now, or if there's sort of the routine contact that we would expect between the U.S. and China, but you're hopeful that sort of direct negotiations.
Currently in routine contact, but this is a negotiation period. That's why it doesn't happen immediately, and there's a process, and we're going through that process.
Thank you, Sarah. Two questions. One following up on that. In terms of negotiations, earlier today Chinese officials said negotiations would not be possible in this current situation with the threats of tariffs. What is your response to that?
Well, look, if they want to stop unfair and illegal trade practices, that would be great. Until then, we're going to continue moving forward in this process.
And then a second question. There are a number of, with the talk of tariffs, a number of farmers, particularly in the American Midwest, who have suggested that the volatility in the markets has made it very hard for them to plan for the upcoming season. And they're already thinking that there's going to be a negative economic impact on them. What is this White House's administration to those farmers, many of whom supported the president 2 years ago?
We're working with the Department of Agriculture. The president has directed Secretary Perdue to do what we can to protect our farmers and to look at different ways possible. I'd refer you to them for some of the specifics and the specific actions that they're looking at taking.
Sarah. Thank you. Sarah, I was wondering if you could kind of speak to, there seems to be a perception that at times the president makes announcements and then the White House has to come up with policy to match what the president said, like with the talk about the military at the border. There weren't really a lot of details about that at first, and with the issue with Syria, him saying he wanted to kind of pull all the troops back. Can you talk anything about like that perception and what's going on there?
Well, I think that's a perception of completely people that don't understand, I guess, how civics works. The only person elected to make those decisions and actually outline what policy should look like is the president. So when he makes an announcement, he's the only one that has the authority to do so. He's carrying out the duties that he was elected to do, and it's up to his staff to implement those policies that he announces or that he makes. So it's He's doing exactly what the American people asked him to do, and that's to come here and change Washington, and he's doing that every single day. Take one last question.
Thank you, Sarah. On the border.
Sorry, I was pointing up here.
Okay.
Sorry,
I got
Anita.
April.
Sorry, Anita, and then I'll go to April for the last question.
I wanted to get an update on the National Guard sending the troops to the border. A couple days ago, the DHS secretary was saying that it could happen as early as that night. We still haven't seen them gone over. I was wondering if you could kind of update us. I know California is the one that hasn't said what they plan to do. They're still reviewing. Will you all still go ahead with the plan if it's just the 3 other states and not them? And can you tell us what the holdup is with California?
Absolutely, we'll continue moving forward with the other border states. We're working with states governors right now to go through this process, and we hope to have National Guard on the ground as soon as possible. And we're going to continue to work with California, and we're hopeful that they'll do the right thing and help protect our borders.
Time? Is there timing?
There's not a specific time, but as soon as possible.
Under 4,000 that the president mentioned yesterday.
It's going to be as many as it takes. We're looking at what that needs to be, and we're going to move forward in the process. The president thinks that's a good first step to have 2,000 to 4,000, and if we determine that we need more, we'll make that decision at the time.
So a follow-up on that, and also on Amazon. Really fast, what happens when this Honduran caravan gets there and you have this presence of National Guards? What is going to happen when the caravan arrives at the border with the National Guard?
Well, thankfully, the Mexican government, in conjunction with our team in this administration, has broken up a lot of that and is continuing to do so. In terms of what the specifics will look like of the National Guard, they will be working in conjunction with CBP, and they will actually, CBP will be the lead law enforcement on the ground, with National Guard backing them up and supplementing them in those efforts. And for the specifics on that, I'd refer you to the individual states who will help make some of those decisions.
Okay, then on Amazon, what is the administration doing with the issue of faxing and the issues of emails? Administrations before this were dealing with the fact that the post office was losing money because of the internet, because of social media, because of people being able to correspond versus using a stamp or metered mail. How is the administration targeting that versus going to Amazon and looking at them as the problem?
Look, we're doing, as I said a few minutes ago, we're working with the post office. We're doing a thorough review and looking at the best ways to modernize that. I don't have any specific policy announcements on that front, but that's something that we're in ongoing conversations with the U.S. Postal Service on.
Amazon contract.
Thanks so much, guys. Hope you have a great Friday.
Why is the president still saying
Okay, you've been listening live there, of course, to Sarah Sanders, White House Press Secretary. Busy day here at the Daily Briefing. You heard first from our own Dana Perino and that exclusive interview with Sheryl Sandberg. We unpacked some of that. Now let's get into the details of what's happening in politics. Chris Steigerwald, Fox News digital politics editor in Washington and the editor, of course, of Halftime Report, and our own Charles Gasparino, senior correspondent for the Fox Business Network. Good to have you both here. Charles, I want to start with you because look, you had the Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, saying today, I believe on another network, this whole deal with China and the tariffs could lead to a trade war. You had Larry Kudlow, the new chief economic advisor, saying the president's not bluffing here. And we see the market's down, what's the latest, 613 points. What's going on?
I mean, they obviously think they have some leverage over China. I think Larry Kudlow's brain has been taken over by Peter Navarro's, to be quite frank with you, because I know Larry really well. He's a good friend of mine. I actually like Peter Navarro as well, but he's
the trade advisor who's more.
He's the guy. Let's go after China with everything we got. And Larry understands that we have a lot to lose in this. And I think, listen, if you're going to be part of the administration, as his predecessor, Larry's predecessor, Gary Cohn knows, you've got to go along with the game plan, which is, at least talk tough on tariffs. Listen, I talk to a lot of investors. They still think it's a bluff. They still think that, yes, you're going to get trading off of headlines on every negative thing they say.
It's a negotiation.
This is
the president's throwing it out there. He's going to try to get concessions.
I will say this. As I reported on Fox Business, 2 major CEOs, under the conditions of getting this information, I can't say who they are, but they're major, went to Trump in the last couple of weeks and said, listen, don't do a tit-for-tat thing on tariffs, and because they're going to respond. It's going to unsettle the markets. It could unsettle the economy. Go with something comprehensive And Trump basically rebuffed him. I just wonder why he hasn't done that and why Larry hasn't pushed him into that.
All right, I want to get to Chris, but first, this morning, you got the Bernie and Sid show here, a local show on WABC in New York City. The president, hailing from New York City, knows these two guys and decided to go on and talk about the trade war. Watch.
We've already lost the trade war. We don't have a trade war. We've lost the trade war. I'm not saying there won't be a little pain, but the market's gone up 40%, 42%, so we might lose a little bit of it. But we're going to have a much stronger country when we're finished, and that's what I'm all about. We have to do things that other people wouldn't do. So we may take a hit, and you know what? Ultimately, we're going to be much stronger for it.
Chris, President makes a fair point that the markets are way up since he was elected. However, there may be some pain in the short term.
The stock market's not the economy, and presidents forget that all the time. They misunderstand. Obama did. Trump definitely does. They think that the Dow Jones Industrial Index is an index of how the nation's economy is going, and it isn't. And when you have a trade war, you're picking winners and losers. You're going to hurt farmers in favor of manufacturers of certain products, but you're going to hurt people who make airplanes, but you're going to help people who make steel. And it never has worked out in the past at that level. The president acknowledging that it could hurt and it's going to cause some pain. Voters don't do pain. Midterm voters do not do pain. They are opposite. Voters always vote for sweetness and light. They do not vote for pain.
So those are the political stakes, Charlie. What about the economic stakes for this president right now?
I disagree that the economy is decoupled from the markets. I mean, the markets are always a pretty good indicator of where smart people are saying.
I didn't say decoupled. You're right.
I mean, you did kind of, Chris. But
I'm not decoupled, but yes, you're right.
But I mean, it is a good indicator of where the economy is going. And listen, it doesn't mean it's going to go there because remember, traders react off the headlines, then they come back and react to other headlines. But what these headlines are saying to this is from really smart people. They're saying you start a trade war, you slap tariffs on steel, you might create a few steel working jobs, which are highly automated, by the way.
Yeah.
Not a lot of people. You're going to hurt a lot of other people, a lot of other jobs which aren't highly automated, like car manufacturing and down the line. Forget about and agriculture as well. So they're saying, the market is saying, trade war, net, if you go there, is going to be bad for employment in this country. I will say one other thing. We have 4.1% unemployment, I believe. We have, yes, I know the industrial Midwest took a hit in the 90s. The industrial Midwest is coming back in a lot of different ways right now. It sounds like Donald Trump is fighting yesterday's war with this. It really does, because the economy has improved and improvised in ways since the 1990s when, yes,
when manufacturing jobs were going away.
And it hurt people. Listen, my father's a construction worker. I understand what happens when you commoditize industries. But the economy rebounds, and listen, Amazon puts Walmart out of business but creates 600 other jobs. Well,
Walmart's not going out of business.
But you see what I'm saying? It hurts the
Let's just say.
Well, of course.
I just want to calm everyone down. We don't want to make the markets.
Walmart may hurt the mall,
I hear what
but Walmart actually creates jobs and helps downtown businesses as well.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the way the economy works. And it looks like on manufacturing, Trump is fighting, again, yesterday's war.
So big picture, the economy in good shape, Charlie. Volatility in the markets. Chris, you're in Washington. Volatility as well, turbulence in this president's cabinet. We've seen some go. Scott Pruitt on the hot seat. The Washington Post reporting this afternoon that the president met with Scott Pruitt at the White House, and it seems to be sticking with him for now. And the Wall Street Journal is reporting that Chief of Staff John Kelly wants him out, but the president's resisting. What's going on?
It's after 2 o'clock in Washington on a Friday afternoon. If you're in Donald Trump's cabinet, it's time to get nervous. They're going to, by the next year, they'll shoot him out of a cannon. They'll have a ritual on Fridays, and they'll just, the sacrificial cabinet member will be shot out of a cannon. If Pruitt stays, he's being selfish at this point. I can't imagine that he believes that he is the only person in America who can do what he did or what he's doing, and that there isn't another human being who could do this without, look, he erred. He made a series of mistakes. He compounded the error because he did not get his story out straight in the first place. It's an ethical breach, and if he stays, he's being selfish.
But, Chris, he has a lot of supporters, conservatives, who say Scott Pruitt is very effective at the EPA. He's cutting regulations that this president wants cut. That's helping the economy and saving money.
Well, there's a lot of people who don't know that Charlie Gasparino's Sunday gravy is delicious because he puts spare ribs in it. And it is.
How do you know that?
Because I know, because I could smell it from here. I could smell it from here.
The Sunday gravy is good. Walmart is good. Everybody calm down. The market's a little testy on Friday. We'll see what happens with the cabinet. Chris, Charles, thanks for coming in.
Have a great day.
All right. The president calling for the National Guard to help secure the border. Will it be enough to get the job done? New reaction from our panel coming up. With President Trump now promising to send between 2,000 and 4,000 National Guard troops to the southern border, the Pentagon now exploring ways to expand support for Border Patrol agents. Our national security correspondent Jennifer Griffin is live at the Pentagon. Good afternoon, Jennifer. When will the National Guard units be sent to the border?
Well, Ed, you just heard the White House press secretary say that the White House would like those guard there as soon as possible. Pentagon officials, however, have given no timeline for when the National Guard will be in place, but did announce they will be standing up a new planning cell here. It will be manned 24/7 to liaise with DHS.
Effective immediately, we are establishing a new border security support cell. This is not business as usual. The cell will last for the foreseeable future to ensure we surge our capacity to meet the President's enhanced border security goals.
The President says U.S. troops might also help build part of the wall on military property. He said that we're going to have the wall and that the military will build some of it on military lands. He was referring to the Barry Goldwater live fire range in southwest Arizona, but that base runs along just 31 miles of the roughly 2,000-mile border and sees jets dropping bombs daily, so it's not clear how many illegal migrants cross that section of the border on any given day, since the possibility of being killed is already high. Ed?
Jennifer, thank you very much for that report. Have a good weekend. For more on this, Drew Littman is a former chief of staff to Senator Al Franken and a former policy director for Senator Barbara Boxer. David Hoppe is former chief of staff for Speaker of the House Paul Ryan, as well as Senator Trent Lott. Good to see you both. I wonder if I can start with you, David. I want to play this sound from Missy Schlapp from the White House. This morning, she was making the case for why this is a good idea. Listen.
These governors are eager for bringing in the additional help that law enforcement needs in order to deal with increasing border crossings. I mean, this is an issue that has to be dealt with, and this is why the president, being so result-oriented as he is saying we need to take action. We know that bringing the National Guards to the border, it works. It worked under President Bush. It worked under President Obama.
David, did it really work under President Obama and President Bush? Because here we are years later, and we seem to be having the same problem with the border.
Well, it works, but it is not a full-time, long-time solution. You need the wall, you need a multi-layered and multi-level protection of the border, and that has to be done, or we will never get control over our borders and never be able to get an immigration policy we need. But does it work in the short run? Yes. Is that what the president's trying to do here, is move to balance some of the money he didn't get for the wall in this last Omni by putting some troops here? I think that's what he's trying to do. It can work in the short run, but it's not the long-run answer.
The Omni obviously being that controversial, well over $1 trillion omnibus spending bill. I wonder, Drew, will Democrats ever get to a place where they can say, okay, you've given us a lot of domestic spending priorities in that last budget, very controversial among the president's base. Will Democrats give something here and say they're willing to give some money for the wall?
You know what? That's not a hypothetical question. In the last round of negotiations, Democrats were willing to give ample funding for the wall if they could reach an agreement with the president to allow the Dreamers to stay, which the president claimed he favored. So I think with the wall, you've already got 700 miles of border fence built, standing up today. There's room to negotiate on the wall.
David, where do you see that going? I mean, the president, it's kind of hard to keep up with the development sometime all around. I mean, the president is jumping into all of this all at once. It was only a few days ago at the Easter egg roll, he said DACA is dead. Is it dead, or is it going to come back?
That's an issue which, over time, has to be dealt with. Obviously, the court system is holding it right now, and the Supreme Court probably won't have anything to say about it until probably sometime next calendar year. So that piece of it is, if you will, at the side. But clearly, this is a problem that must go forward and be dealt with in the terms of the spending. So if we get the CR, the continuing resolution we're expecting in September, then you're looking for a November and December issue where you'll be arguing once again about money for the wall, DACA, and a number of other issues put together, but probably later in this year, not in this immediate time frame.
Drew, obviously later this year we've got this big midterm election. Is time running out not just on getting wall funding here in the next few months, but also dealing with DACA? Is this going to get punted beyond the election?
I certainly think it's going to get punted beyond the election. In fact, I think we'll have a continuing resolution, as Dave said, but I don't think we'll have a big omnibus spending deal for the next fiscal year until after the midterm elections. I think Congress will postpone dealing with that so that they can go home and campaign. So I think all of this, unfortunately, gets punted.
Well, the president, the current omnibus, as you know, runs out, I believe, at the end of September. Right before that midterm election, the president reluctantly signed the last one and said, I'm not signing this again. So we may have a big budget battle right before that election. Drew, David, we appreciate you both coming in.
Of course, thank you.
China imposing new tariffs on the United States, what it means for pig farmers trying to export their product. And a Brooklyn brawl turns into a Saturday stall. Why an MMA star found himself in a New York courtroom this morning. This is a Fox News alert. MMA fighter Conor McGregor is being arraigned on assault and criminal mischief charges right now inside this courtroom. The fighter, boxer, accused of attacking a bus full of fighters in Brooklyn yesterday. You can see that right there at Barclays Center in Brooklyn. Footage showing him even throwing a handcart at the bus, smashed the glass. Two men who were scheduled to be in tomorrow's fight were hurt. Those fights now canceled. Meanwhile, U.S. pork producers taking the hit for the trade war brewing between the U.S. and China. Pig and hog farmers are used to selling products overseas, but now these new proposed tariffs by China, a huge consumer of pork, could really bring those profits down or maybe slash them altogether. Our own Jeff Flock is in Farmer City, Illinois. Perfect name, Jeff. How drastic could this be for farmers in Farmer City?
It's already drastic. You know, this is a quarter of U.S. production goes to China. And the problem is, you know, you say there's no trade war. Well, the pork producers here want to know, and by the way, these pigs that you see right here, they're about 2 or 3 weeks away from market. The pork producers want to know, how come they got shot if there's no trade war? You know, when the president implemented the tariffs on steel and aluminum, the Chinese immediately retaliated with tariffs on 120 U.S. products, including pork. And I've got Rick Dean here, who has been raising hogs for 40 years. And if you lose that China market,
it's going to be big. Yeah, 25% of our total domestic demand is exported.
Right.
And Chinese
is a big piece.
Is a big piece of that. They're $1 billion market for U.S. producers. It's going to be very serious. It's going to make pork cheaper in the domestic area for a while, but the food prices will go right back up.
Yeah, and potential loss of jobs here in the Midwest. You know, the largest independent pork producer told us, Ed, and I put the quote up maybe so you can see it, he said it's going to hurt the red states. It's going to hurt the Midwest. The administration and the powers that be should take note of that. Obviously, the Chinese know our electoral map about as well as we do, so maybe he gets a good price for these pigs, but going forward, I don't know. I don't know how much money they're going to make on the pigs.
Absolutely. They're trying to pack a political punch, I suppose. Jeff Locke in the aptly named Farmer City. Thanks for that report. This, meanwhile, is a Fox News alert. We've been mentioning this, but the Dow is now down even further today on threats of those tariffs from China. Right now, you can see on the big board, the Dow down 718 points on those trade worries, down almost about 3 percentage points on the Dow Jones. We'll keep an eye on that, and we'll be right back after this.